The Delphi Technique by Lynn Studer. What is it? Consensus, the process of abandoning all beliefs, principles, values, and policies in search of something in which no one believes, but to which no one objects. The process of avoiding the very issues that have to be solved, merely because you cannot get agreement on the way ahead. What great cause would have been fought and won under the banner? I stand for consensus. Margaret Thatcher. Citizens often arrive at what has been slated as a public hearing or public forum to find that things don't seem quite right, that there is suddenly this new way of conducting meetings that somehow doesn't seem right. Instead of chairs set up for the audience with microphones where they can give input, there are now tables with chairs where people sit in circles and are facilitated by a pre-chosen facilitator. Below, the reader will see how this is facilitated through consensus building, which is essentially groupthink, and why it stands diametrically opposed to the foundation upon which this nation was founded. The Delphi Technique and how it disrupted. Ground rules for disrupting the consensus process, Delphi Technique, when facilitators want to steer a group in a specific direction. 1. Always be charming. Smile, be pleasant, courteous, moderate your voice so as not to come across as belligerent or aggressive. 2. Stay focused. If at all possible, write your question down to help you stay focused. Facilitators, when asked questions they don't want to answer, often digress from the issue raised and try to work the conversation around to where they can make the individual asking the question look foolish, feel foolish, appear belligerent or aggressive. The goal is to put one asking the question on the defensive. Do not fall for this tactic. Always be charming, thus deflecting any insinuation, innuendo that may be thrown at you in their attempt to put you on the defensive, but bring them back to the question you asked. If they rephrase your question into an accusatory statement, simply say, that is not what I stated. What I asked was repeat your question. Stay focused on your question. And be persistent. If putting you on the defensive doesn't work, facilitators often resort to long, drawn-out dissertations on some off-the-wall and usually unrelated or vaguely related subject that drags on for several minutes, during which time the crowd group usually loses focus on the question asked, which is the intent. Let them finish with their dissertation expose, then nicely with focus and persistence say, but you didn't answer my question. My question was, and repeat your question. Now, along with this, I'm going to read by Dave, 17 techniques for truth suppression, which are used with this Delphi technique. Strong, credible allegations of high-level criminal activity can bring down a government or organization when that organization lacks an effective fact-based defense. Other techniques must be employed. The success of these techniques depends heavily upon a cooperative, compliant press and a mere token opposition party. Number 1, dummy up. If it's not reported, it's not news. It didn't happen. Number 2, wax indignant. This is also known as the how dare you gambit, or maybe say, oh, how arrogant, or that's so arrogant for you to say that, to question authority. 3, characterize the charges as rumors, or better yet, wild rumors. If in spite of the news blackout, the public is still able to learn about suspicious facts, it can only be through rumors. If they tend to believe the rumors, it must be because they are simply paranoid or hysterical. Even better, plant false rumors of your own to confuse them even more. Number 4, knock down straw man. Deal only with the weakest aspects of the weakest charges. Even better, create your own straw man. Make up wild rumors or plant false stories and give them lead play when you appear to debunk all the charges, real and fanciful alike. Number 5, call the skeptics names like conspiracy theorist, nutcase, ranter, kook, crackpot, and of course, rumor monger. Be sure to use heavily loaded verbs and adjectives when characterizing their charges and defending the more reasonable government and its defenders. You must then carefully avoid fair and open debate with any of the people you have thus maligned. For insurance, set up your own skeptics to shoot down. And if you are dragged into a debate, make sure that you control the conversation by doing 85% of the talking, directing the debate by asking almost all of the questions, setting rules for how the other person's supposed to talk, but don't allow them to set any rules for how you're supposed to talk. And never under any circumstance become angry. Anger directed at the facilitator will immediately make the facilitator the victim. This defeats the purpose, which is to make you the victim. The goal of the facilitator is to make those they're facilitating like them, alienating anyone who might pose a threat to the realization of their agenda. People with fixed belief systems who know what they believe and stand on what they believe are obvious threats. The participant becomes the victim. The facilitator loses face in favor of the crowd. This is why crowds are broken up into groups of 7 or 8, why objections are written on cards, not voiced aloud, where they're open to public discussion and debate. It's called crowd control. It's always good to have someone else, or 2 or 3 others who know Delphi technique, dispersed through the crowd, who, when the facilitator digresses from the question, will stand up and say nicely, but you didn't answer the lady gentleman's question. The facilitator, even if suspecting you're together, certainly will not want to alienate the crowd by making that accusation. Sometimes it only takes one occurrence of this type for the crowd to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it takes more than one. Number 6, impugn motives. Attempt to marginalize the critics by suggesting strongly that they are not really interested in the truth, but are simply pursuing a partisan political agenda or out to make money, compared to overcompensated adherents to the government line who presumably are not. Saying things like, no, you, or you think. Try to to say that, they have some kind of confusion and therefore nothing they say is credible. Blow, a minor mistake of theirs, like mispronouncing a word, way out of proportion to cast all doubt on their character. Or you can just invoke authority to say, yeah, shut up, be quiet, here's the controlled press, and the sham opposition can be very useful. 8. Dismiss the charges. Nope, as old news. Oh, so you think. If you have an organized group, meet before the meeting to strategize. Everyone should know their part. Meet after the meeting to analyze what went right, what went wrong, and why, and what needs to happen the next time around. Never meet during the meeting. One of the favorite tactics of the facilitator, if the meeting is not going the way he or she wants, or is meeting a measurable resistance, is to just call a recess. During the recess, the facilitator and his or her spotters, people who wander the room during the course of the meeting, watching the crowd to see who congregates where, especially those who've offered immeasurable resistance. The resistors congregate in one place of spot will usually gravitate to that group to join the conversation and will report back to the facilitator. When the meeting resumes, the facilitator will steer clear of those who are resistors. Do not congregate. Hang loose and work the crowd. Move to where the facilitator or spotters are. Listen to what they have to say, but do not gravitate to where another member of your team is. And 9, come half clean. And this is often done by an elder in the church, for example, saying something like, yeah, after he describes some kind of abuse or hypocrisy that the church leadership has committed, and then he just passes it off with, well, yeah, but, and kind of acknowledging the wrong but not really apologizing or making any amends for it. This is known as confession and avoidance, or taking the limited hangout route. This way you create the impression of candor and honesty while you admit to only relatively harmless, less than criminal mistakes. This stratagem often requires the embrace of a fallback position, quite different from the one originally taken. With effective damage control, the fallback position need only be peddled by stooge skeptics to carefully limited markets. So this is where Billy Graham's quote would come in and be quite appropriate, that people who engage in this need to repent of their repentance. Now, of course, minimize the wrongdoing as impossibly complex and say the truth is ultimately unknowable. And this was what I was taught by Geneva College, that, well, there's no objective reality, there's no foundation, so you can't really be sure about anything. All you can know is you don't know anything. So this strategy also works in face-to-face, one-on-one meeting with anyone who's been trained how to use the Delphi technique. And this is another favorite I've seen employed, is to reason backward, using the deductive method with a vengeance. With thoroughly rigorous deduction, troublesome evidence is irrelevant. We have a completely free press. If evidence exists that the suicide note was forged, they would have reported it. They haven't reported it, so there's no evidence. Another variation on this theme involves the likelihood of a conspiracy leaker in the press who would report the leak. See truth suppression tactic number 1. It's kind of like when Richard Nixon said, yeah, just don't get caught. But any Christian who follows in the post-millennialism that's become popular recently knows that you reason from the future, from the Messianic age. And certainly we Jews are looking forward to a better world to come. And number 12, require the skeptics to solve the crime completely. If the man was murdered, then who did it and why? Yeah, just flip the script on them. Change the subject. This technique includes creating or publicizing distractions, talk about trivial things, play music in the background, or like have food, tell jokes, lightly report incriminating facts, and then make nothing of them. This is called as the bump and run reporting. 15, baldly and brazenly lie. A favorite way of this is to attribute facts furnished to the public as plausible sounding, but from an anonymous source. 16, expanding further on numbers 4 and 5, have your own stooges expose scandals and champion popular causes. Their job is to preempt real opponents and to play 99-yard football. Variation is to pay rich people for the job who will pretend to spend their own money. And lastly, number 17, flood the internet with agents. This is the answer to the question, what could possibly motivate a person to spend hour upon hour on internet news groups defending the government and the press and harassing genuine critics? Don't the authorities have defenders enough in all the newspapers, magazines, radio, and television? One would think refusing to print critical letters and screen out serious callers or dumping them from radio talk shows would be control enough. But it's not. Certainly what Russia's doing in trying to rig elections. Now, your local newspaper publishes notice that a meeting will be held one night a week to solicit input from the community regarding a proposed plan for community development. Being a civic-minded individual, believing that community involvement is very important to the health of the community, you mark the date on your calendar. Make a mental note to hold that night free of other obligations that you might attend this meeting to give your input. The next day you call the number noted in the announcement and ask to obtain a copy of the proposed plan for community development that you might read it before the scheduled meeting date. You're told that the proposed plan is still at the printers, but will be available at the door. On the prescribed night you arrive at the meeting a little early as your custom. You're greeted at the door by an individual who hands you an agenda and the proposed new plan for community development, heretofore unavailable. You find the agenda rather odd. You were under the impression that this was a public meeting. What you envision is what has always been a panel of individuals at the front of the room with one or two microphones positioned in the aisles where individuals from the audience may voice their comments or opinions. As you enter the room, you're further amazed by the setup. There are no tables, chairs for the panel at the front of the room, but there is one microphone positioned beside a podium in front of the room, lecture style. Further, the room is filled with tables, round tables with 6 to 8 chairs around each table for an open public forum meeting. You find this rather odd and ask the greeter if this is really where you're supposed to be. Yes, you're sure. This is where the meeting is being held. Somewhat confused, you take a chair. Others follow, and some you know don't. You note that others like you find this new layout different. Soon the speaker calls the meeting to order. After a short introductory speech, the presenter asks for your cooperation to utilize a new concept in decision making. Following a presentation regarding the new purpose plan, each table will participate in a discussion with the help of a facilitator. Each table will put on paper their thoughts and feelings about this community plan, their likes, dislikes. A roundhouse discussion will ensue at each table from which will emerge a consensus group. A narrowing of the listed likes and dislikes of 2 or 3 that the group deems most important. These, you were told, will be later synthesized. What's going on? You look around and take note of a look of bewilderment on several other faces. No explanation is offered, and you feel quite a disadvantage, but not wanting to look like a total ignoramus or hesitant to ask. You say nothing and go along, but the feeling of discomfort remains and continues to grow. What's going on? Tactics of the trained facilitator. 1. If there is a trained change agent or facilitator whose only means, the church I grew up in always talked about being a culture change agent, using the Delphi Technique for their purposes, political and religious. Anyway, so the only means of pseudo-debate is their definition of dialogue, which again just means them doing 90% of the talking, and they graciously allow you to speak for about 10% of the time under a pretense of a representative process. It requires other listening ears, since the psychology of group dynamics is foundational. The first consideration is not to persuade you personally. The objective is to discredit you so you don't influence others. If their trained, modulated, original tone of voice doesn't disarm the one they are challenging, they go to the next step of authoritative tone, designed to impress with credentials. When that doesn't work, they challenge the opponent's legitimacy to express facts. When that doesn't work, the knuckles get white, the tone of voice becomes shrill, and the motives and accusations of political agenda are used. When that doesn't work, they take their self-righteous leave of the scene, implying that the challenged party is not worthy of their time and warped wisdom. A phrase heard a lot these days is paradigm shift. What is described above is part of that paradigm shift. Parents, community members, citizens, taxpayers have no idea what they're walking into when they suddenly and without warning find themselves participating in a whole new concept of public forum meeting. While the semantics may vary to some degree from meeting to meeting, the underlying framework of the process to which the people will be exposed does not. Under the new paradigm, decision-making is to be decentralized, moving away from decisions being made by solely elected and or public officials accountable to elected officials, moving decision-making, including the people. The public forum and meeting community participation process is the venue for that decentralized decision-making process. Now, point number 2. I've encountered another similar but differently motivated type. They are sincerely wrong but committed to the erroneous idea. They usually have some vested interest in whatever they are defending, being part of an organization beyond the program or issue. They see themselves as spokesmen for not only the issue, but also the organization sponsoring it. Any criticism of the issue is construed as an attack on the organization it represents. They are truly blinded by the association of which they are a part. They too start out mildly trying to bring you around with true sincerity. They're actually interested in changing your mind individually. As that doesn't work, however, they begin to question your authority, to question the institution or idea. The debate becomes more strident, as with the trained change agent, ultimately both do the same exit scenario of being the one to cut off the exchange, dismissing the challenger as unredeemable. Now, the decentralized decision-making process is being sold to the people as a move to empower the people, a way for people to have a greater voice in their governor and decisions made that will affect them. This is the rhetoric that is not the reality. What people don't know at the outset is that the goal or outcome of the process is predetermined. This is made very clear in the book after book on the facilitative process. The decentralized decision-making process has 3 steps. The first step, unbeknownst to the people, is to assess the people as to where they are now. This is accomplished by feeding people information relative to the issue at hand, be it education reform, land use planning, etc. Then soliciting the feedback of people relative to the information presented. The feedback solicited is put in writing to be later analyzed, assessing the people as a collective as to where they are now. The second step is the process of moving people from where they are now to where we want them to be, to acceptance, ownership of what is being advocated by the meeting planners relative to the issue at hand. Long ago, when I challenged my church synod about their bragging about being the first of that denomination, I was finally told, obviously you don't know what you're talking about. We suggest this correspondence cease. To this day, I suspect the official correspondent had no clue what he was defending, but someone up the chain did. Step 2 has 2 phases. The first phase is to establish the framework for moving people from where they are now to where we want them to be. To accomplish this, people must become adaptable to change. People whose belief system is strongly grounded in absolutes and Judeo-Christian principles are not easily manipulated, are not easily adaptable to change. That belief system must be changed in a greater number of people if the goal or goals are to be realized, if sufficient buy-in is to be realized to give the agenda the forward momentum needed to achieve the goal. The facilitation process, utilizing up to 9 basic steps, is intended to move people from a belief in absolute, so that right is right, wrong is wrong, to believing that right and wrong are situational, a matter of perception, from beliefs holding a basis in Jewish principle to beliefs holding a basis in humanism, although this is never divulged. For those who refuse to become adaptable, concession not to sabotage or openly oppose augments the forward momentum of the agenda. In some school districts, teachers are being required to sign a charter agreeing not to oppose education reform. Now, I just want to point out this stratagem used by the social planners, the social engineers of our day, are mainly those who are non-Jewish, often from a Christian background, who hold to this idea of moral relativism. As I pointed out before, Christians are really, the Christian right is the moral relativist. They accuse others of being moral relativists, but they will say that there are 2 different standards. Like they're under grace, but other people are under the law. So that's why it'll be okay for them to have the pastors' wives, the elders' wives as feminists, or they won't say anything about the fact that the Republican Christians on the Supreme Court legalized abortion in the first place, that Thomas Malthus, a clergyman, came up with the population control theory in the first place that led to eugenics and birth control, but they'll only criticize the liberal Democrats and secular humanists who in more recent times have become pro-choice. Now, the passing reference, the modern red schoolhouse, leaped out at me. I'm currently reading a book, Commies, A Journey Through the Old Left, the New Left, and the Leftover Left by Ronald Randolph, co-author of the Rosenberg File. In the book, he has a chapter titled The Little Red Schoolhouse, in which he describes his days as a child of New York Communist Party parents, the commie youth camps, the schools. He attended a private school in New York. Distinctive, and it was a refuge for teachers who would be thrown out of the public school system because they would not sign the Feinberg Law Oath stating that they were not members of the CPUSA, refusing to testify. He said, "There was a reason why we were called the institution we attended, the Little Red Riding Hood, schoolhouse, for Little Reds. One wonders about the name of the modern red schoolhouse for the 21st century. The second phase is to facilitate people into ownership of the present outcome. The process of facilitation is intended to produce consensus, which means solidarity of belief. In other words, through a facilitated process, oneness of mind theoretically occurs. Consensus holds basis in the Hegelian dialectic of thesis, a belief or supposition, antithesis, the opposite belief or supposition, and synthesis, synthesizing, bringing together, or a thesis and antithesis to form a new thesis." And I can't help thinking right here of presuppositional apologetics and the pushing the antithesis notion. The process then begins again, and through continual evolution, oneness of mind theoretically occurs. Consensus, however, left to its own devices, cannot be controlled. As such, a manipulative form of consensus, utilizing facilitators highly trained in group dynamics, it is used to ensure the outcome. While the facilitators are billed as neutral to the facilitated process of consensus, they're anything but neutral. They are key to the group reaching the preset outcome, and facilitated properly, the people emerge believing the decision made, the outcome was their idea, unaware that they were facilitated into a certain direction. This then sets the stage for the third step. And again, this reminds me of Billy Graham's notion and the evangelical evangelism explosion that came out of the Midwest in the mid-1900s, when he talked about how Christians would convert people to their religion, and those people wouldn't even know that they were being converted. And of course, they would use tactics, which one of my former pastors promoted, which was if you evangelize someone who thinks they're a Christian, but you don't think they're a Christian, then hide from them the fact that you don't really think they're a Christian. Just play along and let them become a member of the church, and then you kind of just work on them until you really think they're a Christian. And even after they're supposedly converted in your eyes, I don't know that you ever tell them that you didn't really think they were a Christian. Note, there's a book put out by Teachers, College Press, Columbia University, 1995, for Good Rebels, Socialism, American Education, The Search for Radical Curriculum by Kenneth Teitelbaum with a foreword by Herbert Cole. This book describes the socialist Sunday schools in New York. Hope that's not anti-Semitic. In reading the book, it is hard to miss the parallel to systems education. Kenneth Teitelbaum, at the time this book was published, was an associate professor in the Division of Education at the State University of New York. I was thinking about this because I had just heard a positive response to an online debate. I thought about what was the difference. In the case where the lady responded positive after some lengthy back and forth, she actually switched gears from opinion to fact. She went out and did some background research, as she had been encouraged to do. She had humble pie. She was willing to admit that, yeah, she had only been spying opinion, and ill-informed one that. She went on to sign the statement and resolution. Now, the third step is accountability. Now, doesn't this sound like something I've heard in the church, the whole Ironman thing, and implement the agenda, and business accountability mantra these days? First, the outcome of the facilitation process is decided. Second, the people are tricked into acceptance and ownership, thinking that it was their idea when it was actually a preset outcome. And third, authorship of the preset outcome is given to the people. Then the people as a collective become accountable for the decision that someone else made. That is why when people have objected to being governed by consensus decisions, they've heard, but we had the input of the people. What this does very effectively is twofold. It gives the bureaucracy license to do whatever it wants under the guise of doing what the people authorize us via their decision to do. And second, it makes the people, not the bureaucracy, accountable for the decisions of the bureaucracy. The people become at once the scapegoat and the victim. Most people have no idea when they become involved in consensus circles what their purpose is in the larger picture, that they're being assessed, that their belief system is being targeted, and that they are being used. What is established via the consensus process is covert authority, the same authority that undergirds socialist communist regimes that justify their existence and governance structure in the collective authority of the people. The Soviet Union, a consensus circle, is known as a Soviet. Now, what a stark contrast in Lynn's debates with this so-called Glady. Some of us have concluded that Gladies and some of these other ladies are not real people at all, but plants from the public policy institutes and think tanks, while training the exact form of debate that Mary described yesterday, and perfectly willing to go so far as to engage in very nasty personal attacks and threats. These days of Gentile grassroots activism are over. We are now facing the big boys head-on, and they aren't pleasant. In fact, they aren't pleased that a truly spontaneous, genuine grassroots movement erupted. They intended to control all sides of the debate from the right to the left, and suddenly a few websites show up and a few articles by Lynn Studer appear that expose their agenda a bit too closely. The religion of socialist communist regimes is humanism. Humanism is a man-centered religion, believing that man is a house sexist, devoid of spirituality and self-determination, that man must, therefore, be conditioned to his environment, whatever that environment is decided to be. And this sounds very much like the way autistic and other disabled people are treated in therapy, believing that they have no internal motivation and need some kind of external reward given to them through compliance training. Now, Skinner gave this conditioning a name, military conditioning that's used on people from a young age when they play sports. Operant conditioning, a practice used pervasively in classrooms across America, especially under outcome-based education. Humanism is pagan, occult, satanic. That is why socialism and communism are oppressive governments. Why they lead people into darkness, hopelessness, into bondage. That's why people are so depressed, suicidal in Europe. Humanism is what is undergirding the paradigm shift in America, not only in education, but in all facets of the restructuring of the American society. American society was established on Judeo-Christian principles. This was not by accident. This was by design. Our founding fathers knew there was only one religion under which any nation had ever prospered, under which any man would ever know freedom, and that religion is Judaism. The American government was established on the principles of biblical law, a government of laws, not a democracy, a government of men, humanism, which, by its very nature, is arbitrary and capricious. The contrast between Christianity and humanism is the difference between individuality and collectivism, freedom and bondage, prosperity and adversity, light and darkness. What can people do? First, people must educate themselves when participating in public meetings, insist the meetings be conducted under Robert's Rules of Order. No consensus circles. It is the elected officials and those accountable to the elected officials who should be held accountable for decisions made. Pressure legislators to dispense with appointed commissions, councils, and agencies that are not accountable to the people and that aren't, via legislation, not accountable to the legislator. Pressure legislators to return to the limited form of government established by our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Such a government limits itself to addressing those structures over which is given specific authority. Push for judicial reform that removes the judiciary the right to legislate via interpretations of the law that hold no basis in the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson stated in 1823, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates. Instead of trying in what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. To be able to do that, however, one must have a strong foundation in Western culture and history, something very few Americans have today. If we are to save our nation, we must become involved in the governance of our nation, whether local, state, or national. We can no longer sit back and abrogate are duties of American citizens. We must remember that we, the people of these states and localities, are the fourth branch of government and the ultimate check and balance on authority. We must become informed and involved. Price of freedom is vigilance. Vigilance that has been won.